Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Phillips, and I will be moderating today's conversation. Joining me are four other teens who are very passionate about Alzheimer's and dementia, and who will be discussing their own personal stories relating to the detrimental disease. So, Ava, can you start off by introducing yourself and your connection to Alzheimer's?
Hi, my name is Ava. I'm a rising junior at Spence, and my grandmother had Alzheimer's and she passed away earlier this year.
Thank you, Ava. Can you describe your experience caring for your grandmother and also what being a teen, how that impacted your experience?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think at first it was definitely really difficult. She lives in or lived in Washington State, and that's where pretty much my whole extended family lives. So it was definitely a big deal trying to get out there and take care of her, but also be able to help from far away because obviously we can't be there all the time. So I remember right away, it was kind of a slow process for my grandparents to kind of admit that she had the disease at first. I remember that it seemed like she was just acting a little weird and she was like a little more snappy than usual, if that makes sense. Because she was always a really kind person and she was always really just open for everything. But she kind of stopped being that way. And I used to really love playing Clue. And I remember one time she couldn't play anymore because she kept forgetting the rules. And I think that was the main point where we realized that something was happening there. And then I guess like something I've learned throughout the process definitely is patience because I think especially at first she would repeat herself a lot, asking things about the weather, like what the words on my shirt said, all that stuff. And so definitely kind of being okay with saying something again. My mom used to always be like, it's an acting exercise. You get to say it a different time, like a different way every single time. And so that was kind of a good way to get through it. And then I think just as a teen, I feel like the best thing you can do if you have a family member or a friend with the disease is just to spend as much time with that person as possible, definitely before it's too late. And then also support the people around you. Because for me, I could see like my grandfather had a really hard time kind of coping with it at first. And so whenever we would visit him, we would take him out. We would, almost let him escape what was happening at home and all the responsibility he had to take on pretty quickly. So, especially because it was harder for us from farther away, but kind of being able to connect and also connecting virtually, FaceTiming, all that stuff. So, I think just access and talking to people about it is probably the best thing that you can do.
Thank you, Ava. Just sort of piggybacking on what you were saying, when you were a little child, how did you understand what Alzheimer's was? Like, did anybody talk to you about it? Were your parents like really big about talking about it before you visited your grandmother? What was that process like?
Yeah, so because we went there usually twice a year, so Christmas and then sometime in the summer usually, I was kind of able to see her develop myself. So at first, as I said, it she just kind of seemed off to me. Um, and definitely like playing different games with her and she would repeat some things or lose things more than normal. So I felt like I was kind of able to develop an understanding of it myself. There were definitely times where my dad would talk to me about it, like, it's a possibility. We don't know how long she's going to either live for or how fast this will progress and kind of how there are so many questions surrounding that. So I think I definitely was talked to about it, but a lot of it was kind of me just discovering it by myself. And I think something that was pretty hard about this disease is that you're kind of watching a person die over the course of many years, which, well, that sounds really morbid. It was definitely harder to accept her disease at first than, later when she passed away and all that stuff. So, kind of learning to cope with my own feelings about slowly losing her at first was the hardest part. And then I think once I sort of understood that just by observing and spending time with her, then I was able to kind of understand that a lot more.
Thank you, Ava. Now I'm going to move on to Sophia. So, first, can you introduce yourself and then your connection to Alzheimer's as well?
Okay, hi, I'm Sophia Liu. I'm a rising sophomore at Horace Mann, and my connection to Alzheimer's is that my grandmother has Alzheimer's.
Okay, and Sophia, you've had the unique experience of caring for your grandmother who speaks Cantonese. So, can you talk about that experience of navigating a language barrier?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of like my biggest life regrets that I don't speak Cantonese, particularly like specifically for this purpose, because um my grandmother had Alzheimer's or started having trouble with her memory when I was like, very, very young, so like 4 or 5. So I didn't throughout my life, she's basically had Alzheimer's for most of my life, and I haven't really been able to connect with her for that reason. Particularly because when I was young, I was very stubborn and didn't want to learn Chinese. But like now, I've come to a point where I understand the importance of learning Chinese for like my heritage. But considering that she's had so many years with Alzheimer's, she can't really speak that well anymore, like even in Chinese. So I feel a lot of regret not being able to communicate her with her or like ask her questions and things like that.
Thank you. And adding on to that, just like I asked Ava, how did you understand your grandmother's condition? What was that process? Did you have family discussions? And then also, what's your advice for other people that are in a similar situation to you?
Yeah. So like I said, she's my grandmother has had Alzheimer's for most of my life, so it just kind of became like a way of life where my mom would like sometimes talk to us about it and like try to explain to us what was going on, since my brother and I didn't really know about Alzheimer's when we were that young. And then as we were older, I started learning more about like neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, and it just I kind of came to an understanding or a better understanding on my own. And I think some advice that I'd have for people that um, have grandparents with Alzheimer's, particularly ones where they don't speak English, I would just recommend spending as much time as you can with that relative. Even if you can't like communicate with them, just being in their company is probably what I would advise.
Thank you, Sophia. Okay, now we're going to move on to Estella. Can you introduce yourself and then your connection to dementia?
Hi, I'm Estella McMaster. I'm a rising junior at Spence, and my connection to, dementia is my grandmother has dementia.
Okay, and how have you navigated understanding the trauma that your grandmother is reliving? Because I think that's a bit unique that your grandmother is having
Yeah,
different
I,
experiences.
I can talk about, so my grandmother was born in California before World War II and was put into Japanese incarceration when she was 8 years old. And she lived through that. And now, because she started developing dementia a few years ago, maybe a little more than over 5 years ago, um, because I have a really prominent memory from when I was 11 of dementia. It's it was very difficult to realize what it was because it was a lot of going over to her house because we're a very close-knit family. We're always at her house because she lives in the city. And a lot of like anger and confusion and stubbornness for no reason led to just a lot of confusion and sadness on my part. And that memory from when I was 11, which prompted a big conversation with my mother, was when she said, "Oh, make sure to pick up that sewing machine you left in my house." So my mother is an interior designer, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, she was a fashion designer. And that prompted I haven't used a sewing machine in 15 years, which was was very strange for me to process, saying, why does she think it's the past? Which really prompted the whole conversation with my mother. Your grandmother has dementia, and learning about that whole thing.
How did you cope with, you said you had some confusion and anger just by not really understanding what your grandmother was going through at 11. How did you cope with that?
Um, Really, it was a lot of talking with my mother and support to her, and always being able to be there and making sure to be supportive and nice and not confuse her or over if you talked to her about too many things, she would become angry or confused. It was a lot of support and just being very, asking her direct questions rather than many, and really sadly seeing her regress further and further into the past, where, before my mother was alive, it's very, very hard. It was very, very hard to watch, and still to talk to and see. And sometimes when she texts me, she thinks I'm younger than I am. Um, it's been very hard to cope, but I think being able to have a strong support system of my family and being able to support her has really, really helped.
Thank you, Stella. Okay, so now going on to Haley, can you introduce yourself and your unique connection to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so I'm Haley. I am a rising senior at Spence, and my connection to Alzheimer's is that this will be my third year in an independent science research program at Spence. And I've been focusing my research on Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative diseases, specifically Alzheimer's, and more specifically looking at antibody therapies in Drosophila or fruit fly models. Of Alzheimer's. And before that, I had also been looking at like cognitive therapies that could be like computerized to work specifically with Alzheimer's patients. Yeah.
Thank you, Haley. Can you also talk about the future applications of your research and why you're passionate about it?
Yeah, so originally when I was going into ISR, as Sarah knows, who's also in the program, I kind of was confused as to what I should be researching. It seemed kind of daunting. And I just remember like doing a lot of, I knew I wanted to do something related to medicine. I really just kind of, that is something that I felt like I wanted to spend my time on. And I remember just neuroscience seemed really interesting to me, especially because like everything that's unknown about the brain, and it seems like there's so much discovery to be had in the field of neuroscience. And because I don't have like a personal firsthand experience with Alzheimer's, I actually do think one of my great great grandparents did have it. I've since found out, but um, I just had been doing a bunch of research, and a bunch of these statistics had kind of jumped out at me. Like Alzheimer's is, I think, the sixth leading cause of death, and it's also the only one without a cure. And then once I think you hit 85, elders have a 50% chance of having or contracting the disease, developing the disease. And all of this kind of just alarmed me almost, because this is really one of those things that just doesn't have a cure. There's ways to mitigate the symptoms, but there's really nothing to cure patients. I think another big disease that a lot of people in the program have been researching, like cancer, which obviously there's multiple types and it's super complex, but there have been cancer survivors, but there have not been any Alzheimer's survivors. And also just something super interesting to me is just how memory is super integral to us as humans. And when you lose that, and when you end your life without kind of remembering the experiences you've had, I think that's something that just kind of saddened me. And so I was really kind of pushed to want to figure out, or at least kind of enter the field and understand what's been going on in the field. And so I guess more specifically to my research, like the future of it is what I've been seeing in what I've been doing, and what the lab at NYU has been doing is, even though it's just in fruit flies, these antibodies that they've been using to combat one of like the hallmark proteins in Alzheimer's that's thought to be kind of active in the brain when there's an Alzheimer's patient, it's able to mitigate the symptoms from the core, not just, like helping with mobility or other things like that. That's kind of like a secondary symptom that's unique to the patient. This is kind of actually mitigating like what's happening in the brain. And so there's a lot of hope with that, especially because it's been a long haul with, all this Alzheimer's research that has been going on for a while. But, there's still such a need for it.
Thank you, Haley. Just another question. Since you didn't have like a grandparent or relative that inspired your motivation to advocating for Alzheimer's, what's your advice for other teens that might not have a connection but want to get involved? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think what really, as I was saying, drew me to it was actually also, I just realized I had watched when I was first getting into the research, this PBS documentary. I think it was called Alzheimer's Every Minute Counts. Um, you don't have to watch a documentary, but I do think it was really well done. And I think for someone who doesn't have firsthand experience, kind of either talking to people who do, getting volunteer time with it, and kind of speaking with different patients can be helpful, or also kind of trying to understand what it's like. I think I unfortunately don't have that experience, and that, well, fortunately, I don't have a relative with the disease, but I haven't had that firsthand connection. But I think that that documentary, along with a bunch of the research that I did, it just kind of highlighted to me the issue. And I think, if other teens want to get involved with volunteering, as I said, or just kind of looking into it and understanding really like how it's such a big concern for our population as we age, and also specifically for women, because women tend to live longer. It becomes more prominent for women to develop the disease, as I think all of your relatives were women. So that's just kind of being emulated here. I think, it's something, especially as a woman, that I found interesting to look into.
Thank you, Haley. Okay, this is a question for everyone, and you all can answer this. But what's your advice for all teens, and also how should other teens get involved in Alzheimer's? What should they do, education-wise, outreach-wise, advocating? Just some advice.
I'd be happy to start. I think definitely getting involved in any way you can. Obviously, there are a plethora of organizations you can look into, especially in your area. We're working with CaringKind here, but even the Alzheimer's Association has stuff all over the country that you can get involved in. And I've done a little bit of that myself, but I think another thing that you can do, which I found to be pretty valuable, is just talking to older adults in your community, whether they have Alzheimer's or not. I think for me, especially, I knew that my grandmother had all these stories that I wasn't able to hear because, she wasn't able to tell them to me anymore. So I got involved in Young Sages through DeRote, which is another program where you get to talk to older adults in New York City, especially. And so I think through that, I was just able to hear different people's stories, which I wasn't able to get from my own grandmother. So if you still have grandparents or older adults that you know, even just sitting down and talking to them about their experiences, I think can connect you with a lot more people, and you can form a lot more connections that you wouldn't make otherwise. And I think that's something really valuable that you can do, even if you don't even know someone with Alzheimer's.
I think another way is first really just educating yourself on the issue. If you want to help, realize what it is, how it affects people, um, the root causes, and statistics, and um, what it really does. And that is going to be able to help you to, find ways to help, especially people that knowing what it is going to be able to help you help them. And just as Ava said, talking with people, hearing stories, getting involved with organizations that help, is all going to be would all be very beneficial.
I can also say, sorry, my phone was ringing. So I also think what Estella was saying is super important, like kind of how I came to like understand what Alzheimer's truly was through educating myself. And I think specifically kind of when I dove into that research, I found that there were a lot of misconceptions from like what I thought Alzheimer's was, maybe from how it was portrayed in the media, or kind of, I think there is this tendency for people to make fun of elderly people not remembering things, but that can be, an actual disease. And then I also think what Ava was saying, I've been a part of a program at my synagogue called Calling Generations. I think it's actually through DeRote as well. But we've been just talking to a elderly member of our congregation once a week, and hearing stories and kind of interacting with some of these seniors who have been alone, especially during the pandemic, even if they don't necessarily have a neurodegenerative disease, just, hearing the stories of older people, and trying to interact with like intergenerational interactions, because I feel like there's kind of a divide between, people with the disease and then the teens, who definitely have so much passion to give to help advocate on behalf of the issue.
Yeah, definitely. Talking to elderly people, not just with dementia, is really helpful. There's also been like a lot of research saying that like social interaction can help a lot with people with the disease. So it's definitely important, not only just for that reason, but also because a lot of elderly people just have really interesting stories and things to talk about. So it's not only beneficial for them, but it's also really entertaining for you as well.
That's all great advice. This is more towards Estella, Ava, and Sophia, but are there any stories you have with your grandmothers that you want to share about, like maybe how your perspective on Alzheimer's has changed, or even if you can't really interact with your grandmother, how just having some sort of emotional connection has left an impact on you?
Yeah, sure. My grandmother can't really do this anymore, but I just one really strong memory I have of her when I was little was she taught me how to knit, which is something that I still do today. So I've been knitting for a really long time, and she was teaching me how to knit, and even though she can't speak English, she was kind of like saying it like through my mom who was translating, and it was like a really nice experience. Like it was just me and my mom and my grandmother all learning how to knit, also kind of relearning for her because she kept forgetting. But I think even though I was making all of these mistakes because I was really young, I just remember spending time with my grandmother, and I haven't really done that in a while, and I just remember it was really nice.
I can go next. I think two things come to mind immediately. The first is just even right towards the end when she had been bedridden for, I guess, over a year or so, and she couldn't really communicate with us anymore. We showed her a lot of old pictures because we'd kind of go through a bunch of old pictures, letters, all that stuff. And she was still able to recall some things actually, because something that really struck me about this disease is that it kind of comes in waves. So it's pretty based on the day. Like one day she won't talk to anybody for the entire day and she, wouldn't want to eat anything, but maybe the next day she'd have a full conversation with somebody. So I think that showing her all these old things sparked some memories for her. Um, and so that was definitely really nice to see because we were still able to communicate with her a little bit. And then another thing, especially for my grandmother, was music. And that was something that she didn't lose until the very, very end. So even when she wasn't communicating with us and wasn't really able to hold a conversation and kind of know what was going on, if it was, someone's birthday, she could still sing like the high harmony and happy birthday, or like my grandfather would play all of her old favorite songs and she would still know a lot of the words. And that's something that really struck me, is that she still knew the melodies, all the words, everything to her favorite music, even though she couldn't remember even like what age she was, or that her parents were, long passed away, all that kind of stuff. So that was something really positive that we got to share with her, and kind of learning her old songs that she still knew, which was really nice.
For me, my grandmother developed a bit of a hoarding problem due to dementia. My mom told me it was because due to the incarceration, all of her things were taken away. So she hoards items and she has a big problem. She always thinks that her doormen are stealing her items and that her housekeepers are stealing her items. She has a safe for her valuables, but like her little trinkets and stuff like that. But sometimes if she's feeling okay, I can hold something and say, where'd you get this from? And every item for her carries like a memory and has a story to it. So I think talking about these items and just letting her talk about them and how they're sentimental to her has been a really great way for me to connect to her.
Okay, last question, and then if anybody just wants to ask a question or just talk about anything. But how have you bonded with your other family members or extended friends by going through this experience together of having a loved one go through Alzheimer's or dementia?
There's this show called BoJack Horseman, and there's an episode in it called Time's Arrow, which describes his mother going through dementia. And when I watched it, I sobbed. So I had my family watch it, and we just kind of had a whole talk about dementia and how it's affecting people. And that, having an animated example of dementia that really kind of rang true to my own grandmother's experiences of reliving past memories. Obviously, vastly different memories by the characters, but the regression and the confusion and the anger that rang true to this character kind of rang true to my grandmother. So we had a big talk about that. And I think that helped me connect. Um, Especially with my dad, who is, this is not, my grandmother's not on his side. So he's always kind of felt like the odd man out. So, and his parents, my grandfather on his side has passed, and my grandmother is on his side is doing very well. So, this helped him kind of also connect with my grandmother on my mom's side.
I don't know if there are any specific like instances, but I think the whole like Alzheimer's thing with my grandmother has definitely bonded me more to my mother. Um, or at least helped me understand her a little bit more because um she's the only one in my family who can speak Cantonese. Everyone else speaks Mandarin, which is a different dialect. Um, and for a long time, she was the only one taking care of my grandmother because my grandfather had passed like 10 years ago, and my uncle was living out of the country. So it was mostly just her taking care of her. And even when I was like little, it was really hard to see like how she was doing it all on her own, like having to cope with like her mother losing her memory and having to care for her and like all of that. And I think that helped me understand like her life and also just her experiences. And I think that just has brought me closer to my mother in general.
I agree. I think definitely I got a lot closer with my grandfather and just kind of seeing him go through this process with her, especially because they live so far away. So I got to see kind of a glimpse into their daily life when I got to visit them. And so he kind of had to learn to take over making all the meals, taking care of her. And he would like hold her hand every night and like play her favorite songs and all that stuff. And it was really nice to watch. And I just got to talk to him more about that, which I don't think I would have done otherwise. And then also, I got to see a lot more of my extended family because people would visit for longer periods of time because they wanted to spend more time with my grandmother. I got to see my aunt and uncle more. And I think that I was just able to bond with my family a lot more in that sense because people really wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. So when we went out to Seattle area, we were able to see a lot more people. And then I think bonding with my dad especially, there was kind of a whole issue with her access to care because they live kind of far outside of Seattle. So they didn't have a lot of access to things like home hospice and getting a caretaker to come there. So all of the issues surrounding that and a lot of the, I guess, challenges that we went through to kind of get that care for her, I was able to kind of connect with my dad on that and help out, I guess, and glimpse into that process a little bit more. So I think just going through something as a family was definitely helpful to bring us all together and I guess cherish more of the joyful moments because it can seem really challenging sometimes, but there were definitely some moments that were really nice.
I don't have any more questions, but does anybody want to say anything?
All, people that have relatives or people that they know suffering with Alzheimer's or dementia, know that you're not alone and that, you know, you have support behind you and that you can provide support that's going to really make a difference in these people's lives.
Yeah, also just kind of from the perspective of, the research community around Alzheimer's, I know it does seem that, there's been research on Alzheimer's for decades even. But it does seem that, there's hope around the corner. I just from like, all the articles I've read, all the, lab meetings I've been to, it seems that every day with new technology and more resources, there's grants being given out and, there's so much research still going on, and I don't think, any of these research institutions are going to stop until, there isn't a successful, whether that be some sort of drug, whether that be some sort of therapy, etc. But, I think that there is hope. Maybe it's not tomorrow, but it is on the rise.
Just kind of piggybacking off of what Estella said, I think that if you have a close family member or somebody that with this disease, it can be really challenging, especially as it progresses. Like towards the end, my grandmother didn't even know my name, but like me still talking to her and engaging with her was still helpful. So even if it seems like what you're doing isn't really making a difference, it definitely is. So keep doing what you're doing. And I guess any involvement is going to be helpful no matter what. And continue to support the people around the person with the disease because they are the people who are going to remember what you've done. So definitely making a difference in their lives is going to be really long lasting.
Yeah, definitely. Piggybacking on the supporting like people around the person, just check in with them every now and then, like see how they are because it's really difficult, particularly like for people like my mother, who are in like close contact with my grandmother most of the time. Just make sure that like they're okay and things like that, and also just know that the disease. Someone already said this before, but it kind of comes and goes in terms of lucidity. So sometimes they'll have full conversations with you. Sometimes they won't remember who you are. So just appreciate like their company and make sure that you talk to them and things like that.
This is all great advice. And also, CaringKind has a lot of resources. So if anybody is looking for that, there are helplines. You can talk to someone 24/7. There are lots of events, walks that you can get involved with. And we have a whole page on the website dedicated towards teen under 21 advocacy and education. So you will find a lot of different videos, including this one, just to ground yourself in the facts and education, but also ways to contribute to finding a cure for Alzheimer's and really being an advocate. So thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar.